Welcome back, our dear friends. We're back with dear friend Christopher Clark, our first major interview, who's heavily dominating the December lineup of videos.
And I promise no money exchange hands.
None did. As much as I asked him and begged for it, it didn't happen, because I'm going to keep it real right up until I can sell out, and then I'm going to sell out as hard as I can. But the price has to be right. And it turns out his wife has the money, but it's not him. But we're back together because in reviewing the several videos for December that all revolve around Christopher Clark's work, the program observer Ivan Tomic had a question about game design, and I thought it was a really good question to pose to a man with plenty of experience with it. And then I've got a brand new favorite question that some of y'all saw me ask Keelan Halverson, and now I want to go back and ask everybody I've interviewed the same question. So we're going to get started with the game design question. Chris, Inner City, on this character sheet, there's not even stats. You don't even roll for stats for these people.
No, sir.
And when Ivan asked me this question about, I want you to ask Chris about the design decisions that go in making a simpler game versus a more complicated game, because there's games of all different levels of complexity. Like I've heard Pathfinder players had to have a degree in math in order to do the first edition right. And there's all kinds of complex situations with that. But what's your thoughts on that? How did Inner City wind up the way it did?
Well, the interesting story behind that is that I had a number of friends. We had just found this new game, which was really cool, called Dungeons and Dragons. But a lot of my friends didn't want to play because it was too complex. And it's about all that weird magic and dragon stuff that's all make-believe. And at the same time, anytime you turned on the television set at 7 o'clock or later in the evening, all it was bad situation police dramas, melodramas, Streets of San Francisco or Mannix or whatever else it was that was on. And everybody thought those shows were cool. Oh, did you see Police Story last night? They did this, And it occurred to me that why the police shows were as popular as they were is because there was an accelerated degree of violence in them. And the violence took two forms: car chases, for the most part, and shootouts, fights. Okay. And that this is what was getting everybody's adrenaline pumping. So I figured to myself, okay, how do we make this so that, number one, it's not too many rules in such a complex game, and number two, we accentuate what amounts to the violence aspects of the game, because that's what's tripping everyone's trigger. And so we came up with a very simple game that mirrors, in a lot of ways, things that were done in D&D, because I liked the game. I had a lot of respect for the design. It's funny that we were probably the first game that ever did ascending armor class.
So that wasn't something you pulled away from third edition.
Oh, no. Well, I'm sorry. The game you're looking at was first actually produced in 1978 and was first published in 1981. So it predates third edition by a little bit. And in fact, the people who played it in those days and played it addictively, they were still watching the cop shows. So we had to be very careful not to get a cease and desist from any of the studios as well, which is why all the names are different. That's what originally led to all the names being lampooned. But yeah, the ascending armor class was not so much, wow, what a great idea, as we need to make sure that they don't think we just copied all the rules down from Dungeons and Dragons. And so let's change everything we possibly can. Which now there's wisdom points and ascending armor class and all of these other. We even altered the thief skills, which were borrowed from first edition, but we altered them a little bit so that they wouldn't just be a direct ripoff of first edition.
Yeah, they're meaningfully different.
The key to that game is it's a violence roller coaster. People play it just because you play for 2 hours and you're out of breath.
Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen just step by step down a street. I've experienced it. Yeah.
Well, yes, I know. We've had some wonderfully fun sessions together, but it was really easy to get even the, how do I want to put this without insulting my dear friends from that era, the simplest to get involved in it and play, because it was all over television. So it was very easily grasped at that point.
Well, and then there's a lot of folks that don't like complexity in their fun. They just want to relax, have a good time. And I know that the 6 ability scores that a lot of games use,
right,
that intimidates a lot of people. And one of the things that I find a strength about this game is that you pick what you want to play. Here's your pack, run with it. And it takes the guesswork out. You know what you can do. One thing I touch on in the video is it reduces analysis paralysis, which is a thing that 5th edition gets awful, is the amount of options available to you makes it to where you can spend hours and hours just trying to figure out if you want a particular feat or not.
It makes it more difficult to munchkin the rules as well, yes.
That's true. And so you can focus on just playing the game.
Right. Well, and everybody wants a GE minigun after the first session. And then they get one and they find out that it costs, $1 to $6 per bullet, that this thing spits out at a rate of 20 per turn. And then they don't want a GE minigun anymore.
My favorite weapon so far was that Weatherby 460 rifle.
The Chrysler hunting rifle, yes.
Oh, that was beautiful.
That's an actual rifle that you can buy. People very often hurt themselves using it. Those who are not instructed in its use, yes.
Yeah, and before anybody goes out and tries to use a weapon or carry around a weapon, train at a range with someone who knows what they're talking about, and not just your buddy who says he knows what he's talking about. No, somebody with a certification. There's NRA people all over the country. They'll help you out.
Yeah,
but guns are fun. Anyway, so in general, with the games that you make, veer towards the more simple, lightweight rule set design. Is that true?
Not entirely true. For instance, the new Lance system we just did is not terribly lightweight. It's a skill-driven system with stat backups. We even went so far as to differentiate your hit points. You don't have hit points in that game. Your gear has hit points. And if it gets through your gear to you, you have hit points. But you don't have just hit points. You have 8 different sets of hit points. So it depends on what kind of damage you're taking. It's a near future outer space game. The reason for that being, the guy who can take an enormous pummeling in the bar is not necessarily the guy who will last more than 3 seconds once he's accidentally jettisoned from an airlock. Okay, and the guys with a lot of, we'll call them airlock hit points for now, just for ease of reference. The guy with a lot of airlock hit points, don't get me wrong, he might last as much as 10 seconds. Okay. But yeah, you pretty much, if you're the guy without airlock hit points, the minute you get jettisoned, you're rolling a new character. Yeah.
So what is your design philosophy, or maybe the design philosophy that you can see that's out there between lighter rule sets versus heavier rule sets? What are people trying to accomplish?
The game you play should feel like the genre you're trying to recreate. Lance is about what you can do rather than what you can kill. Now, don't get me wrong, there's shooting and there are people who will try and shoot you and kill you. But half the time you're trying to figure out how to refabricate the oxygen supply system on your ship before everyone dies of asphyxiation.
That's important.
Okay, but it's a complex process. So you need a slightly more complex rule system. Given all of that, because you don't want playtime to be, we did 1 encounter in 4 hours. That is really, a bit much. So the idea is to front load all the complication so that when you're actually playing, you can go, okay, here's this negative and this bonus, and you're going to need a 37%. Go ahead and roll. That's it, 37%. You can do the math yourself, but there it is. So, okay, let's try it. Boom, and wow, we all died. Play again. and that's how it is. So
it happens. Is it an issue of how far down the simulationist rabbit hole do you want to go with your game? And
again, it's all about feel. If it's a complex universe you're trying to create, then it should have complex rules.
Okay.
Okay. So, for instance, I do stuffed toy games, which I don't know if you've looked at yet. We'll get there one day.
One of them is spot some.
One of them is a game that you can use stuffed toys and beer bottles, by the way, to play football. So you can recreate Bud Bowl using this game. It's called Sports Fuzz. One of the actual units of play, one of the accoutrements that you will have when playing is a little triangular football like we all played with in school, so that, a football game you should play with a football, because then it feels more like you. The immersion factor, the closer you come to making your rule set feel like your situation, the better your immersion factor. That's my personal opinion. Hopefully that's not too much lingo.
No, that makes sense. That makes sense. And if anybody has questions about it, they can ask them in the comments or hit you up, because I made sure to plug your Facebook on video for Inner City. And there's something that I noticed about the different character types that you can wind up with in Inner City. It looked to me like only the cop was capable of multiple actions in a round. 1, is that true? And 2, was that an intentional choice to limit people to one action?
Well, no, because you can also take amphetamines in the game, which will damage you, but will give you multiple actions. The other one is there are incidentals. If you play cards a lot, they're called interrupt. So it's not your turn, but you can play anyway, type things, right? The hoods especially have an interrupt called cover up crimes. It doesn't have to be your turn, and you could have just killed the guy, but you still roll to cover up crime. So you do actually kind of get 2 actions that way. But yeah, oh, believe me, everybody loves the hood once you're starting to get close to 50 crimes. So yeah.
Oh yeah, hood's got quite a lot going for it. But in general, outside of the few abilities that, like you said, are interrupts or using meth, uh, each character usually gets one action a turn, which keeps things moving. And one of the
Right.
complaints I hear about like fifth edition is that, oh, I got this bonus. Oh, I got this reaction. I got my main action. I can move. I can do this, that. So every character, like by default, can do like 4 things in a turn. And so it just slows everything
That yeah,
down and it's
that's
painful.
well, you can do 2 things in a turn if you have 2 pistols, because you get to fire each one of them. And you can do 20 things in a turn if you have a GE minigun, but just roll all 20 dice at once. Really. It's
And that's a satisfying thing to watch happen too.
right. But yeah, Don Rentz from Cheswick recommends that you get a GE minigun and enough dice that you can roll them all at once. Yeah.
Now, does he happen to sell dice? Is that why he recommends you get them all? Get that
It
many?
might be. It might be. If you play Lance, see, this is the interesting thing too. In Lance, for instance, because you have different defense pools, right? Okay, so you can take electrical damage versus heat damage versus cold damage versus impact damage. Okay, the weapons occasionally do more than one kind of damage. So if you get hit by a railgun, for instance, of course it does impact damage, but the shockwave can also hit you with electrical damage at the same time, because it travels fast enough that it actually generates an electromagnetic shell around it that is of significant enough force to shock you when it hits you.
Wow. Wow.
Plasma
Yeah.
rifles, of course, do like 4 kinds of damage. So you get this huge wad of 20-sided dice to roll all at once. And Don, by the way, pay attention. It's best, of course, if they're different colors for the different types of damage.
Yeah. Might need that.
Again, it reflects the complexity of what's going on.
Okay.
If you fired a laser rifle and you roll your 4 die damage, great. And then you fire the plasma rifle and you roll 12 dice damage, great. It's not the same as you roll 4 heat dice for the laser rifle, but you roll 8 impact dice and 2 electric dice for the railgun, and you roll 8 of like 3 different kinds of dice for the plasma rifle.
So Inner City rule set is designed the way it is to promote fast action oriented
Right.
play, just like its source material. But Lance, it's a lot more complicated because it's a much more complicated setting. It's going
Right.
for a different feel. And that's why you would vary your approach.
I wanted Lance to feel like Firefly, The Expanse, that sort of thing. Making something feel like Starsky and Hutch. Yeah, the simpler it is, the more it feels like Starsky and Hutch.
Is that your
Isn't that the
measuring
same
stick?
road that they cart chased down last week? No, of course not. You know.
So since you mentioned you should write the rules to meet the genre that you want,
Yes.
my new favorite question for people is, if you had to pick one literary or movie genre, one milieu that you got sucked out of this world and you got plopped into it, which one would you choose to go to? Now, bear in mind, you have to deal with the good parts of this genre and the bad parts and the inconvenient parts. So if they don't have running water in this genre, you don't get running water. What would you pick?
I was entranced by the Land of Oz as a child, believe it or not. Yeah, the worst thing that happens there is wicked witches that you can get rid of with a bucket of water, let's be honest. So, and the nice things that happen there are like restaurant meals grow on trees, and emeralds line the roads, and the roads are made of gold, and it's a wonderful place. Would it get boring? Probably after a while. But yeah, you'd never have to worry about anything for the rest of whatever your existence was. And a lack of worry, I think, would make me feel a bit younger once again.
And we're talking the Judy Garland Land of Oz. We're not
Correct.
talking the books. We're not talking the Return to Oz movie.
We're not talking the prison stuff. That's,
Okay. Okay.
yeah.
Well, that's interesting. I hadn't thought about that one.
But the other one is Barsoom.
Oh, go on.
Yes.
Christopher Holmes would love to hear about
and
this.
again, because, well, the good guys always win. They don't always come out unscathed, but they do always win. And you have everything from, well, let's be honest, as a 14-year-old boy reading the books of Mars, tons of sexual tension. You have ancient ruins that crop up everywhere. There are always dire enemies to defeat and powerful allies who gain to your cause. And yeah, it's a very black and white type of place.
Nice.
With only the occasional skullduggery from which you learn. The protagonist always learns.
Well, cool. Well, cool. I like it. Okay, so the potential downside for Oz is that you might get bored. But I figure just wait for some flying monkeys to come by and fling flying poo at you, and then you gotta go chase them.
Well, then you're going to level up to level 3. Yeah, and then what do you do? I don't know.
And the downsides to Barsoom would be you'd get beat up a lot.
A lot, yeah.
You might get
but
in
you can
prison
jump higher
lot.
than a lot of things. So yeah.
So a lot of bad things would happen, but they wouldn't necessarily be like life-ending bad things. They're
Correct.
just rough and tumble kind of things.
Learning experiences. That's what we
Okay.
call learning experiences. Yes.
Well, that's not bad. That's not bad at all. Well, I knew you'd have some interesting answers, so I'm glad I asked. I'm glad you're as interesting as I thought you were.
No, it's all a facade, believe me. Yeah.
So inner city.
Yes.
I gave a warning to people in the review of, if you're delicate in sensibilities, this probably isn't the game for you, because you probably don't like the source material. How did you get away with doing a game like Inner City?
At the time that it first released in its box format, a lot of stores refused to carry it, believe it or not. Oh, this is terrible. And not 5 years later, I believe it was, that the Book of Vile Darkness came out, but let's not go there. Be that as it may, and it's funny, I tell GMs, okay, so for instance, you're playing with a bunch of high school kids, and the 14-year-old boys invariably want to throw their $100 down and go with the hooker. I said, here's how you describe that scene. Okay, so you go upstairs with her. We break for commercial, and as you come down the stairs, you're wearing a big smile. What do you mean we break for commercial? That's the way it was always done. This is about 70s cop shows.
That's true. That's true. Yeah.
So what do we do now? We roll for disease. What? Yeah, there were a lot of really nasty things back then that they didn't have cures for. So yeah, have a nice day. Oh, by the way, you ready for your next prostitute? No, I think we're done there. Yeah, okay, all right. But if you don't include it, that was half of those shows back then. Who was Beretta's sidekick? A pimp. He was. Huggy Bear was a pimp.
Yeah, and it was really only in the like 80s movies that you would get any love scene, and even that would be kind of through a veil. Correct. In the dark. Yeah. You wouldn't see a whole lot of like full frontal anything.
But that didn't make it less titillating. It just made it, I don't know, less pornography and more theater of the mind, if you will. And I mean, that's our business, is theater of the mind. So, yeah.
And the meme is going around, and has been for some time, that the men did greater things when it was harder to see tits. And I'm a firm believer in that, because you have to be creative, you have to be driven, and you have to keep at it. Because I grew up in the era when porn wasn't just everywhere. Right. You had to work for it. If you wanted to see a copy of your friend's dad's Playboy, you had to come up with a plan for when he wasn't there. You had to coordinate. You had to time it. I know, because I did these things. And it was good team building. It developed my planning skills, and it made me work for something. And women, if in case there are any women watching this, if you make a man work for you, and I don't mean give him petty shit tests. I mean, if you make him wait before you give him everything, he's going to appreciate what he gets more. If any of our dear friends out there have any questions for Christopher Clark, like I said, hit him up on his Facebook, and I'll put a link to his Facebook profile in the description, or leave it in the comments. I'll ask him. We'll get back to it. And if you want to hear Chris's thoughts on, say, the rules designs of different game systems out there, he is an expert. He's been doing it for decades, and he's worked with the best. So he might be a good guy to ask. And like I also said before, keep an eye on his Facebook page for when he does do those inner city games and the Lance games, because they're free, they're online, and they're fun. So
if I may, yes. Saturday the 8th at 9 p.m., we are going to be running on Roll20 some Inner City Redux. We have a gang of 4 crooks right now that could easily be expanded to about 12 if anybody wants to show up. But that's on Roll20. Look for Inner City Redux. I'll post a link on both our company page and on my personal Facebook page.
Good deal. All right, my dear friends, I hope you found this as enjoyable as we did, and we're going to keep talking offline, and feel free to keep talking offline with us. Mr. Clark, appreciate seeing you.
Thanks for having me. And I mean that, of course, in just the surface sense, but yes.
Not in the sense of one of the 4 crimes that
not,
we're
not in the biblical sense. That is correct.
Get out of here. Catch y'all later.